Okay, with the Oscars coming up here, I figure some people might be interested in my opinions on them. And my opinion is the Oscars have become irrelevant. Now, I don't want to be like most other people who just kind of complain how the Oscars are irrelevant and just leave it at that. And I want to somewhat explain why they are irrelevant or have become irrelevant, the reasons behind it. Uh, and it's a mix. But I think the first things first, it's we must establish that they were relevant at some point. That they picked films that were of substantial quality, that had lasting impact in society and in the film industry. And to illustrate this point, I pulled up a list of Oscar winners, and I'm gonna go through a decade and then compare it to our previous decade. Basically, I picked the 1970s because it's now been a good 30, 40 years for some of these films. And as I go through this list, keep in mind that that's how old these films are and how relevant they and memorable they still are. So, let's start off here. With 1970, we have Patton, still considered a classic. Still, many people imitate, the whole him giving the speech with the flag. Next year, in 1971, we have The French Connection, another one that is still widely remembered today. It's remains popular, was popular at the time, and is still respected. 1972, The Godfather. This is one of the all-time classic films. 1973 is The Sting. Most people, granted, have not seen this film. I have. Still fun. It's still memorable. It's still shown on television. 1974, Godfather Part 2. Again, one of the all-time classics. 1975, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Still, Jack Nicholson's one of his best performances. Still to this day, considered a great film. A lot of people still love this film. I just saw it the other day on AMC. Next year, 1976, Rocky. Another film that is considered one of the all-time classic films. People quote from it. People imitate running up the steps. I mean, how many people at that art museum have run up those steps and imitate a Rocky? 1977, Annie Hall. I will admit, I have not seen this film and have not heard a whole lot about it. And it beat out Star Wars. But all right. I will withhold any judgment because I have not seen this film. But it beats Star Wars. Ugh. Okay. But overall, still good. 1978, we have The Deer Hunter. Another film which, let's face it, many people have seen, many people have watched. It's considered good. It's still known today. It's still in the conscious. People, you can ask people, have you ever heard of the Deer Hunter movie? And most people say, yeah, they've heard of it, even if they've never seen it. In 1979, we have Kramer versus Kramer. Not as well known even today. Few people will still remember it. But alright, that's the 70s. Yeah, next year we had, the next starts the 80s, but we won't go through all that. Overall, most of the films are memorable. Even the ones that aren't that memorable, the ones that I haven't seen, Annie Hall and Kramer versus Kramer, these films are, 30 to 40 years old. There is allowed some time degradation. But you figure films that came out within the last decade, well, they shouldn't have that issue, right? They're all fairly new. Let's go over the past decade. In 2000, we have Gladiator. I love Gladiator. It was a big hit, bringing in hundreds of millions. I have it on DVD. It's still a lot of people still like to watch it. Very good choice, right? Even looking at the nominees here, well, maybe Crouching Tiger would have been I would have been happy with. Next year we have A Beautiful Mind. I've seen the film. It was a fairly good film, although even to this day, it doesn't seem to have that kind of oomph, that lasting influence. Even asking around, not a whole lot of people remember this film, even though it was good. I will admit it was a good film, but it really lacks that excitement or the classicalness that other Oscar winners have had. It's kind of dropped off the radar. 2002, we have Chicago. I know it was really big at the time, but it was another one of those films that came and then disappeared. A lot of people forget about it. A lot of people forget. I mean, they remember it because of the play, which is still incredibly popular. Didn't really have any lasting appeal. I don't hear people talking about Chicago the way I hear people talking about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And you can argue, oh, well, that's a classic. Yeah, that's what these films should be. And it beat out Gangs of New York and Lord of the Rings. These are just the nominees, mind you. Lord of the Rings and Gangs of New York. 2003, of course, Return of the King basically got that because they realized that they had been kind of jiffing Lord of the Rings for the past 2 years, and they realized that they basically skipped. They had to make sure that Lord of the Rings got some awards this time. There was a lot of pressure on them to reward it, and lo and behold, Return of the King becomes one of the biggest prize winners of all time in the Oscars. And of course, it's still widely popular. Very hard to argue against that for that year. Next is $1 Million Baby, who it was popular at the time, was highly referenced, and it's still a lot of people know $1 Million Baby. I won't knock on it too much, although I think its star is also falling. I don't think if I were to be giving this review 20 years from now, would have remembered so much. But I have to give it at least some credit. At the time, it still has cultural relevance. Now we get midway through the century, and now this is where stuff starts taking a nosedive. 2005, we have Crash. Who the hell remembers Crash? The only reason Crash basically got it was because it was, well, had a lot of actors in it, which goes to the political thing, which I'll talk about in a bit. And, well, it dealt with racial issues, and Hollywood likes to think that it's the 1960s still. So, Crash won. Nobody remembers Crash. In fact, the only time I hear people reference Crash is referencing how bad the Oscars have gotten. At least if they pick Brokeback Mountain, that still has some relevance today. It's still considered, a groundbreaking film. 2006, Departed. This film is still fairly popular. And especially looking at its competitors, this seems like one of the rare good choices. Next we have Old Country for Good Men in 2007. Another film which a lot of people now have gone and seen it and said they were bored by it. It wasn't that exciting. They didn't think it was that good. Probably then questioning whether this really deserved it. And you're looking over the other films that were nominated. Oof. With the exception of Juno, I don't think any other film is remembered. Who remembers There Will Be Blood and Michael Clayton or Atonement? I don't, and I think I saw one or two of those. 2008, we have Slumdog Millionaire that had a lot of popularity at the time, but has dropped off the face of the earth in recognizability. And this is just from 3 years ago, people. Think about that. This is not considered an all-time classic. I'm sure there's people out there, I'm sure it was a decent movie. I'm not arguing that these are horrible movies. But I'm arguing when you're making it what the Oscars were when they used to pick a movie, it was a movie that became an all-time cultural classic. 2009, we have The Hurt Locker. Another one that's fairly faded very quickly away from the cultural memory, and even Hollywood memory. Nobody's kind of reinvoking The Hurt Locker. Granted, it's only been 2 years, and then of course we have the 2010s, which I'm not going to get into the whole who deserves it and whatnot. But I think I've proven my point here. How back in the day, those films were popular. That when they picked an Oscar winner, that Oscar winner was considered really a great achievement in cinema. And well, nowadays not so much. The film, they get the Oscar, it's remembered for about 1 month, and then people forget it. Even people in Hollywood forget it. And that's kind of due to what has become, especially in the last 5 years, but starting way before it, the political angle of the Oscars. And when I talk about political angle, I'm not talking about politics, although that does play into it, but internal Hollywood politics. And a lot of people have agreed with this. That basically people pick Oscar winners based on that they want to work with somebody. They're going to be starting a project in, let's say, 6 months. And they know that person is in that movie. So when I go back to talking about Crash, there's a lot of actors in there. In reality, that's why it got picked, because people are going to work with those actors, and they would rather be working with an Oscar-winning actor or a person that's appeared in Oscar-winning films. It helps their own. It helps themselves out by rising their own standards. In fact, the movie you're in with more people from Oscar-winning films, the better. There's of course behind the scenes quick pro quo stuff. There is of course people advertise in subtle ways and promote them getting selected as the Oscars. They have to be careful, like what happened with the Hurt Locker a couple years ago. Not to be too blatant, but it happens a lot. And there's certainly pressure from from studios and others that you should go and support this particular film, especially from like studios like Miramax, which really push heavy for their films with people working in their studios, because Miramax really relies on that stuff nowadays. And of course, so there's really all this internal politics that's inside Hollywood, and it has really nothing to do with the film's content themselves. The other downside, and of course, I talked about the politics. That also plays into effect. Hollywood, if it feels it can possibly get, an Oscar-winning, somebody getting something special for the first time, and they can kind of promote themselves, they will go and pick it. There's a lot of pressure then on people that I think within Hollywood that they feel if they don't, there's some sort of even if the film's not worthy. Maybe the actors are worthy, but from other films they've done. I mean, Hollywood loves to try to make a scene out of the fact that they're doing something that's a big accomplishment. But when you do that and you give it to films that maybe are okay to nominate but not worthy of winning, that's bad. And then of course there's the subject matter too. Another thing, like I'm going back to Crash, but like I said, Crash is a classic example of it dealt with a political issue that Hollywood just loves. So there's a big pressure. Now I would really love it. I don't know. I haven't been able to find it. I don't think they talk about the percentages ever of how many votes were for which movie, how many votes for other movies. Because when you look about it, Hollywood normally has traditionally there's 5 nominees. Which basically means the winning film probably gets about only a 30%, I'm guessing, on average. Like I said, I haven't found the numbers. Anyone can find a number like where you can actually find the percentages of who vote. Not maybe who voted for which particular film, but where did how were the votes distributed? And that's, I think, going to be the next problem. It was certainly the problem last year, because last year they increased the number to counting right here, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They doubled the number, 10, which basically means a film can win now the Oscar with 11%. It's possible that a film can win the Oscar with, slightly above 10% of the people voting for it. So you can have a film that just has a good, small little core, even within Hollywood, supporting it, and everything else. This is, I think, going to be a very big downside for the Oscar. And the reason they increased it is so they could put more popular movies in, like last year, how they put, I think Avatar would have got in there anyway, but District 9, Inglourious Bastards, Up, these more kind of studio movies, without, let's say, taking away their traditional ones that they like, even though I would say their traditional ones aren't really their traditional Oscar picks. But that's the same problem I see this year. You're going to see winners that really aren't necessarily winners, that don't have really a consensus. I mean, when you have a film that probably is only going to take away 15% of the actual votes for best film, that's a horrible way of selecting. They really have to cut down the number. I will not. I'm running out of time a bit, so I'm not going to propose what they should do to change these films or to change their selection process. I have my own ideals. Maybe I'll make a second video, but man, they need to really get their act together. Certainly, I will suggest this. Go back to 5 nominees. this is 10 nominees is way too much. It makes the choice completely irrelevant because there's such little consensus. Then, I mean, like I said, if somebody can get me the numbers on how the votes are actually distributed and who's the winner, maybe I'm wrong, and it turns out one film always gets a huge percentage and everyone else is kind of small. I kind of doubt that, but we shall see. Signing off for now.